if you're anything like me, there will be times when you will hear something, you will see something that triggers you, and you kind of have this emotional outburst, this emotional reaction. And we've got tons of idioms that describe this, like seeing red, blowing a fuse, and they all just describe this kind of overwhelming feeling that is hard to kind of control in the moment. Now, this is what David Goleman affectionately calls the amygdala hijack. And that's such a great word for it, because in that moment, it can feel like we have been hijacked, like we're having an out-of-body experience and we have no control over our reactions. But today we're going to talk about what the amygdala is, why it happens, and actually how we can manage it, because when we do have these explosive and often negative reactions, it can be really detrimental. It can be detrimental to our confidence and our belief in ourselves, but it can also have detrimental effects on the relationships that we're trying to build around us. So what is the amygdala? So the amygdala is an almond-shaped structure in the midbrain, and it's where we place emotions. And it's part of that fight or flight response. We also have around that is the frontal cortex, and where that is, what happens there is sort of logic and reason and rationality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the process in a way that kind of I relate to, and hopefully you'll be able to relate to it as well. Here we go. The way I describe it is that we are all part of a twin. We are a set. So we have our logical, rational side, and that kind of comes from that frontal cortex. And for me, that's Charlotte. And Charlotte reacts and responds when she's well fed, when I've slept well, when I'm around people that I feel safe with, and I'm in an environment that I feel comfortable in. Then I feel like I have the time to be able to kind of process the situation and have a rational, logical reaction. Now, take any of those things away from me, so I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm around people that make me feel uncomfortable, or I'm in a sort of frightening environment, then what happens is my emotional twin reacts, and that comes from the amygdala. Now, I affectionately call my emotional twin Betty. Now, the reason I do that, and I've called her a name, is because she's my best friend. Ultimately, she's there to keep me safe and protected. So I can't hate her. I can't wish she'd go away. What I have to learn to do is to work with her. So imagine, if you will, I'm walking down the park late at night, and I can see someone chasing after me, and they've got what looks like a weapon in their hand. Now, in that moment, I don't have time to think logically. All right, I'm recognizing there's a threat there. And so Betty, because she's stronger than me, because she's part of that fight or flight response, she's going to instantly react and manifest herself in the way to get me away from that threat. So that could be the flee response, which is to run as fast as I can to get away, scream my head off, pump the heart starts pumping really fast to get the oxygen to the muscles that will help me run faster. Or it might be that I fight and the adrenaline pumps around my body in case I get hurt, I won't feel it. Or I'll just start fighting, physically fighting. It could also be within that I start saying really like aggressive, horrible things in the hope that I frighten that person away. So what's happening there is that I'm very thankful for Betty. I'm very thankful that she is right there doing what she needs to do, and it's an unconscious process. Because, as I said, there's no time to think logically. The problem with Betty is that she doesn't know the difference between a real life and death situation and an uncomfortable one. So, for example, if I am called by my boss and they say, we want you to present in front of 2,000 people at the conference next week. If I have possibly been in a situation where I have had a bad experience presenting, or I've heard other people talking about how scary this is, then instantly my Betty again is going to go, nope, there's a threat here. I don't want to do it. So again, she'll manifest herself, and that could be in different ways. It could be limiting beliefs, telling me I'm not good enough, You'll make a fool of yourself. You don't know what you're talking about. They've obviously asked you because there's nobody else to ask. All of these things can start to kind of play games with our head. It might be that you actually then do it, but when you get up on stage, you completely forget your words, completely forget what to say. Maybe you get emotional and start crying, all right? Or you start giggling out of nerves. All of these kind of reactions that feel very unnatural and not really who you are. It may also be that, again, your boss calls you, but this time it's to give you some feedback. And they say, you didn't do good yesterday. The presentation was not your best. What were you doing? Now, again, in that moment, maybe Betty is feeling threatened. You know, my integrity is being threatened. My ability is being threatened. I'm being put into a very vulnerable situation and I don't like it. So it could be that I become defensive physically. My body language closes up. My facial expressions change. Maybe my voice tone becomes defensive. Maybe my language becomes aggressive. Now, what can happen in these situations is it's instinctual. It's unconscious. It's Betty trying to get you to survive this situation. But later on, when we've calmed down and our logical side can our Charlotte can kind of come in, I can then have very different thoughts. When it comes to the presentation, it could be that I'm going, this would be amazing for my career. It would be that this person has asked me to present because they believe in me. And I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm doing. When it comes to the feedback, it might be that I go, well, you know what? Yesterday I wasn't in a good mood. I'd had an argument with my partner. I wasn't focused. I was distracted. And actually, yeah, that feedback is fair. That is much more constructive, much more positive, much more effective way of thinking. So what we have to now learn to do is to go, what can I do when I'm triggered by something? And it can be something that somebody says, it could be something that you see, it could be an atmosphere that you're feeling. I need to make sure that I don't instantly react. I need to make sure that I take a second to process what's happening, process my feelings, and then think about a constructive way of approaching this response and this reaction to cause as limited amount of damage as possible. Because also, you don't want the other person's emotional twin to kick off as well. If you're getting angry and aggressive, then they become defensive, and you can see it becomes a vicious cycle. So let's look at some ways in which we can pause, take a moment in order to process the situation with more of a logical brain than hitting out with that irrational, kind of illogical, emotional response. So the first tip number 1, is to breathe. Now, I'm going to do a video that looks a little bit more intensely in breathing because it is something that we do every day. We have to survive, but there are more effective ways of doing it, and it can have real positive influences on every sort of facet of your life. But for now, what we want to think about is you giving yourself a chance to take some time to process what's kind of happening, and also to stop some of the physical manifestations that come when we're under stress, which is the heart starts to beat quite fast and we have that instant fight or flight response. So if you can feel yourself starting to kind of bubble up a little bit, you're not liking what's being said, you're kind of picking up an atmosphere from the body language that's kind of coming at you, is to just say to yourself, breathe. And what we want to try and do in a nutshell is to take a deep breath right down sort of into our lower ribs. So you can practice this by putting your hands on your lower ribs, kind of wrapping your fingers around your lower ribs, breathing out and trying to get your ribs to touch each other, and then breathe in to really expand that rib cage. So what that's doing there is it's just allowing the lovely cleansing breath to kind of really fill your lungs. And then breathe out the stress, breathe out the frustration, whatever it might be, but take a second to breathe. Okay, tip number 2 kind of leads on from tip number 1, and that is to try and count to 6. Now, the reason I say that is because it has been shown that it takes 6 seconds to go from your kind of amygdala way of thinking, using that part of your brain, to starting to use your frontal cortex. So to calm down and use your more logical side. 6 seconds. So if somebody asks you a question you don't like the sound of, somebody says something in a tone of voice that you're not quite happy with, whatever the trigger might be, is to take that 6 seconds, because you can breathe in that moment, but also you can say to yourself, now, what is triggering me? Is this because I'm unprepared for this question? Is it because I actually have made a mistake here, but I'm not feeling very comfortable admitting that mistake, so I'm going to put up my defenses? Whatever it is, it's to start to go through and try and recognize the feelings that you're having and learning to manage them a little bit more. So take that 6 seconds to breathe and maybe see the situation from a different perspective. Tip number 3 is to talk about it. Now, a lot of people aren't very comfortable talking about their feelings. And one of those reasons is because they don't actually recognize where the feeling is coming from. They know that they're angry, they know that they're frustrated, but they're not quite willing to delve into why they're feeling that way. So my advice always is to find someone that you trust. Someone who is going to listen to you and someone who will offer you honest advice, and somebody whose opinion you respect. And then talk to them. Talk to them about what you're feeling. Talk to them about the experience that you had. Because talking is a really interesting thing. When we're thinking, so we're thinking about this situation, we're thinking about this argument, we're thinking about the feedback, we think as our Betty. And that's why we can end up almost getting ourselves in more of a state. We can catastrophize, or we can make it bigger, or we can actually, what we can do, which can be quite damaging, is taking what was said and manipulating it slightly in our head to fit our narrative of what we want from the situation. Whereas when we talk out loud, we start listening through our logical side. And that can also be why so many people say, thank you so much for listening, or it's been really good to talk. And talking therapies are amazing because you're given the opportunity to talk, which then means that you hear yourself back logically. And sometimes you can go, oh, I was just being silly. Or maybe I recognize that I need to take accountability for this. Or no, I am justified in my feelings, but maybe I could look at a different way of expressing myself. So it's good to talk, but it's important that you find that person to start with that you trust and that you can open up with. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm all about trying to create the best version of ourselves. And that a lot of times comes from understanding our emotions, our reactions, so that we can put our best foot forward. So if you'd like to see more videos, then please do like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you next time.